Welcome back to the channel, everyone. So today I have a painting I'm going to do on a larger canvas, not one of my 8x10s. I can't remember the size of this, but this is based off of a photo I took on the way to work one day of a interesting cloudy morning. So let's get to it. Alright, so I watered down the canvas, and honestly I use way too much water because the paint just it spreads easier when it's watered down, but there's just way too much of it. So it started to kind of clump together and be all weird. So after a lot of trial and error, I was able to get it, worked and fixed. And it's funny because usually with my daytime sky, they're usually a lot darker than this, but in reality, for that time of the morning when I took the photo, it was actually the blue sky was really bright. So it helps contrast with this darker, like navy blue color, which is the closest approximation I had to the clouds of that day. And I think in the future, for a lot of my new paintings I'm going to do, I want to use a lot of reference photos. I mean, there's nothing wrong with painting out of your own head, but there's something different about having a reference photo to reference to make sure that you're keeping the painting looking a little bit more realistic with where things are, perspective. Of course, just going out to the middle of nowhere and just painting what you see is probably the best, because then you have a live show as to what's going on. Oh, and here, yeah, I was a little over eager with the clouds. I didn't realize I hadn't done a gradient color yet. It was like that light blue color that fades down into the yellow. So this is me painting over those colors or over the clouds and giving that green, blue, yellowish faded color back in there. Could have saved myself a lot of work if I had just done it the right way from the start. And of course, we got to re-add in all the clouds and all that. So, yeah. Just a little word of advice: do your gradient colors before you start doing more of the detail work. And here, just taking my little flat brush and trying to do a little bit more detail work on the clouds. And here, I'm just doing just a watered down, like yellow orangish color. That way I can kind of do the fade up from the sun, because all of these clouds were, well, they had this orange yellow tint to them, because obviously the sun was gonna, I don't know, washing them out is, I guess, the color. And then just putting some of this up in the higher clouds to indicate some brighter spots where the sunlight was hitting. It all gets tweaked back and forth, but eventually ends up not looking as splotchy and as bad. Really just kind of working back and forth with gradients, just trying to get that fade, that sunlight fade on the clouds. You ever actually just look outside during the sunrise, you'll see this effect. And here I'm just adding a little bit of orange wash to the back side of all the yellow, just because it makes it look a little bit better. I should probably put more orange in there, but it was more of a subtle effect anyway. And here I'm about to start just putting in the trees. They're very distant, so you don't get many detail, but that's fine because I'm just using black ink, or sorry, black paint. I don't know why I said ink, and just dabbing it in with a little kitty brush because it works perfectly for doing this. And I'd say with something like this, being subtle with it and not going too far too fast is probably best. Just build it up in layers, real slow, just to yeah. I mean, well, the slower you go, the more detail you can put in, and the more you can kind of gauge what you're doing to make sure you're not going too fast. It's like using a power tool versus a hand tool when you're working on something. And one of the things I liked about this photo that I'm using as a reference is everything was pretty dark, so you don't have to put in a lot of detail when it's dark, which is really nice. I mean, obviously the clouds had to have a lot more in them, but like the trees and like the roadway, the little bushes on the side and the grass and all that stuff didn't need that much because I mean there wasn't much detail in the photo because it was just in the morning on the way to work. And what you see me doing here is I'm just using my palette knife to a little bit of black paint and putting in some telephone poles. It's a really easy way of doing that and making it look a lot better than if I'd used a paintbrush, because a paintbrush would have probably went all over the place, and because you're not really perfectly steady whenever you're using a paintbrush. But with a palette knife, you can get really crisp lines. And looking off the photo and also just trying to give a more realistic color fade is when I was right here painting in the telephone lines, like they just faded out into nothing as they were going closer to that third telephone pole on the left there. And obviously I just put the little beginnings of it, but if you look at the photo, you can't really tell where those lines are. And I think it's an interesting subtle effect. Same thing on the side here. I'm just putting in some black lines and then using a little bit of this muted gray to suggest that the lines are going up and out. And finally, it's time to do the grass. It was a very, very dark, muted green gray color, but I wanted it to look a little bit better than it did in the photo, so I tried adding a little bit more green to it. And honestly, I think out of this entire painting, my favorite part is the roadway. I mean, I had to do some interesting color mixing to get that darker, almost blue tinted gray, just because that's how it looked in the photo. And then, obviously add these little lines here. That was muted yellowish color. I just took like a normal yellow and mixed it with some gray color. And then same thing with the white here, just a little bit of white and black to make a more muted off-white color. And I think the reason I like the roadway is because it gives a sense of depth and like movement, I guess, and also just like location because it's identifiable. Otherwise, it just kind of looks like everything's just far away and indistinct, and you can't really tell where you're at. But with the roadway and the little side, like I guess barriers, what are these called? These fences or whatever they're called, the ones you see everywhere on the highway or on a normal road, it really gives a sense of placement, I think. And I would say here, if you're a beginning artist, and I still am, use reference photos. They really help getting perspective and really help you figuring out how to paint something correctly. And then obviously, the longer you paint, the more your brain catalogs what you're seeing. So it might just be easier to be able to do this without actually having to get a reference photo. Yeah, a lot went into just trying to get as many details crammed into this roadway and those fences or barriers, or whatever you want to call them. Here I'm painting in the little wooden poles that hold up the actual divider or barriers. But I realized if I wanted to make them, better straight lines and make them look more like how they do in the photo, I needed to tape them up. So that's what I'm doing here. The color is it's a very dark brown. I just mixed like this. I don't even know what color brown that is, but brown mixed with black to make this really dark color. And I go back in later with the lighter brown color for the highlights from where the sunlight's hitting. I mean, it's very subtle because it's still in the morning time, but I think the effect worked out pretty well if you look closely enough. And that's, I guess, one of the things I like about painting and artwork in general. If you can cram a lot of subtlety into paintings like this, and it's just like this attention to detail seems to be an eye grabber for people who actually pay attention to that sort of thing. Now, originally when I was painting this, I wasn't going to put in the little bushes, but I realized at this point that it didn't like if I wanted to add more depth to it, the roadway and the barriers, they did a good job of that, but if I really wanted to add more depth, I needed to add a little bit more I guess technically in the middle. Well, I guess that's still the foreground, but yeah, I needed to add a little bit more in there. And then in front of me in the actual photo, and you'll see it later. There was actually quite a few cars, but here I just wanted to paint in at least one, so it doesn't look like the roadway is completely just barren of people, other than I guess from the perspective of the viewer. All right, and this is why I'm not really a fan of putting down the tape first, because I always seem to have this issue where I'm peeling up the tape and there's always paint underneath it, and I don't really know why. Like through here and the sides and all that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back through and use this board, a little piece of balsa wood, and try to see if I can lay it down, since I tried tape and it kind of was starting to tear up the paint that was actually already on the canvas. Yeah, well, that didn't work. So I just decided to freehand it. As dangerous as that is, um, I was really, really careful with it. Just went around painting in all over the actual, the spillover paint. It's that blue because, like I said in the beginning, I watered down the canvas a little too much when I was doing that blue spread, so I mean, like the sky color, so it ended up just kind of bleeding through underneath the tape. All right. Well, after a little bit of tweaking, I was able to get the edges mostly right. So now, just have to sign it. All right, and there we have it. Hope you all liked it. It's based off of a photo I took a while back. Colors aren't exactly perfect, but it's the best I can do right now. Anyway, so hope you all liked it. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, share, all that. Helps me out, helps keep the wife happy, since this is all for her. I appreciate you. See you in the next one. Bye.